But a series of difficult geopolitical issues. The sense in which we talk about the VUCA world, a vulnerable, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, means that all these issues are interrelated with each other. If we think just about Brexit, and I will talk about Brexit, we miss the complexities of what's going on, and we miss some of the strategy that Romania ought to be developing, the Romanian companies ought to be developing for dealing with the problem. Now, when I was here a few months ago, I was talking about Brexit, and it's very uncertain, and we thought, well, don't worry, as time goes on, the uncertainties will disappear, we'll get a clearer idea of what kind of Brexit we're going to get, what kind of agreement Britain will sign, and unfortunately, the uncertainties haven't really changed. I think it's just as uncertain the outcome now as it was over a year ago. And I'm not suggesting it's entirely this guy's fault, though I'm sure he's played a role. I was actually commenting with a friend this morning, I'm not actually sure if we will have a British government by the end of the week, the speed with which ministers are resigning at the moment. But uncertainty on the British side is only part of the problem. We have a British government that genuinely doesn't seem to know what it wants out of Brexit. It's deeply divided over Brexit. But at the same time, we have a European Union that has trouble negotiating, because you have to agree the position between 27 countries. And that makes it very difficult to be flexible in negotiations. So uncertainty about Brexit is likely to continue, and that's got very serious implications for a country like Romania. It's not only that Romanian companies may have trouble doing business in Britain, British companies may have trouble doing business in Romania or in Europe in general. It's not only that there might be problems for the Romanian population working inside Britain. It's also that if it's a very bad deal and Britain just walks out, Britain will not pay. And that has implications for EU funding for projects, and we heard the Minister talking about the extensive EU funding for projects developing business in Romania. It comes into question how many of those projects survive, whether the Germans or the French will be willing to increase the funding. So uncertainty is going to continue, and it's going to be profound. So what would a business diplomacy approach look like for dealing with Brexit? The first thing you've got to do is you've got to analyse what are the opportunities as well as the risks. Don't focus just on risks. Brexit could open up some very serious opportunities for Romanian companies. What distinguishes business diplomacy from purely business approaches is the long-term engagement. This is not about short-term profit. Diplomats are not into zero-sum games where one side loses and the other side wins. Diplomacy is essentially about trying to find outcomes where both sides or all sides benefit. Diplomacy is about creating networks of information and influence, building up networks that can help you in the future, with whom you can develop partnerships, with which you can develop coalitions of state and non-state actors. A very important point the Minister made earlier today about reinforcing the role of Romanian attachés, commercial attachés abroad. Businesses must work, must collaborate with Romanian commercial attachés, but business cannot depend on them alone. They can't do it all for you. As businesses, you've got to take some of the load yourself. But why do you take a business diplomacy approach? Because there is another approach. Another approach is simply let's take advantage of the Brits. So we have financial centres in Paris, financial centres in Frankfurt, in Dublin, Luxembourg, even, would you believe it, in Madrid, where I live, trying to claim the banks, trying to secure the banks from the financial centre in London to build their own financial centres. This is a zero-sum approach. We win, the Brits lose. I would argue that that's short-sighted because we have other problems in the European Union. I believe Europe's got an existential crisis which is very key to the future of Romania and what's happening with Romania. Because Brexit is not such a big problem. The Brits go. The Brits have never been European. My mother talks about Europe as where her son and grandsons live. My mother goes on holiday in Europe. She lives in England. And England is definitely not part of Europe for her generation. So let the Brits go. There's a bigger problem. And the bigger problem for the future is how do you deal with the relationship between the Eurozone and the non-Euro members? Because the idea originally was that all non-Euro members would eventually end up in the Eurozone, and that looks increasingly unlikely. It looks increasingly like there will be at least a two-speed Europe. And managing that is going to be the real challenge for Europe in the 21st century, and the real challenge for governments like Romania, who are at the moment outside the Euro. Many things can happen. It's a highly unpredictable situation. And we talk about these in terms of a Scottish philosopher. I use a Scottish philosopher because the Scots voted to stay in Europe, so I hope you won't mind. David Hume had a problem with induction. And David Hume captured this problem with induction with swans. He said, every swan we have ever looked at is white. We've seen hundreds of thousands of swans. We've seen millions of swans, and they're all white. Therefore, all swans are white. And then we discovered Australia, and the swans are black. And David Hume pointed out this is a kind of a problem in our reasoning. Nassim Taleb is a Lebanese financier who used this concept in what I think was a brilliant book called Black Swans, to talk about black swans as being the unpredictable things that happen in the future, the things we cannot predict. Not that if we worked harder we might be able to predict them. That's to misunderstand the concept. These are things that you cannot predict. Donald Rumsfeld called it. Donald Rumsfeld was asked a question about the destruction of art and culture and museums in Baghdad, which he didn't want to answer. So instead he gave a rather profound philosophical answer. You may remember it. At this stage I'm going to dare a Rumsfeld accent. But there are no knowns. These are things we know that we know. And there are known unknowns. And these are things that we know we do not know. And then there are the unknown unknowns. These are the things we don't know. We don't know. Or as Nassim Taleb said, black swans. In the context of Europe, perhaps Europe's turning into Australia. It's suddenly full of black swans, full of things we don't know about the future. And this is very profound from the point of view of Romanian companies. Why would you form partnerships with British companies? Well, you might, because forming partnerships gives you reinforcement, gives you protection against other problems coming in other contexts. Whether those contexts be the European Union, whether they be Russia, whether they be Turkey, other issues which cause problems for Romanian companies. In effect, the business diplomacy approach to uncertainty, to forming partnerships, is a way of buying insurance. You're hedging for your future. So returning to black swans, I thought this was a nice black swan, Natalie Portman. My claim to fame is my second son was once in a film with her. This one, my oldest son. Mind you, if you blink, you don't see him. The business diplomacy approach to black swans is to build networks of information and influence, to build coalitions with state and non-state actors, to form partnerships, and in your strategy, the way you think about the future, to be flexible and build resilience. Because as Field Marshal von Moltke said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. As Mike Tyson put it, the boxer, everybody has a plan until I punch them in the mouth. Back to Brexit. What does this mean for dealing with Brexit? The first thing it means for dealing with Brexit is identify key sectors where Britain is doing something that's of interest to Romania, or Romania is doing something of interest to Britain. And then build partnerships. Build partnerships with British companies who are trying to buy insurance against Brexit, who are trying to hedge their futures against Brexit. But from the point of view of Romanian companies, this is buying insurance, this is hedging your future against all the other nasty black swans out there, none of which look as nice as Natalie Portman. We talk about long-term engagement. It's not short-term profit. This is something about diplomats know. Diplomats work on the basis they can be around for a long time. They can't just go and do something and walk away. So they have to think about long-term engagement. And I think increasingly for companies in the volatile world of the 21st century, it's not just about Brexit. Companies need to be thinking about the long-term relationships, how they protect themselves well into the future. Reinforcement and resilience, this is outside Brexit too. There's another aspect worth mentioning here. Recently we've been increasing evidence that the Brexit referendum may have been influenced by some form of cyber attack. Increasing evidence of large-scale Twitter campaigns, Facebook campaigns in the last days of Brexit, all in favour of leaving the European Union, coming from accounts which appear to have their origin in Russia. And this raises the other issue of dealing with cyber diplomacy in business. Let's get beyond the current diplomacy of the gin and tonic and extensive cocktail parties and get into the cyber world, which is the world where many of us have to operate these days. Actually, I would say it's the world where all of us operate. Somebody pointed out to me in a conference in Madrid not long ago, we do not have telecommunications companies and non-telecommunication companies. We all live in the digital ecosystem. All companies are now telecommunications companies because all companies are online. If they're not online, it's because they're bankrupt. Cyber diplomacy is using diplomacy to manage problems in cyberspace. It's a bit different to digital diplomacy. Digital diplomacy is where you use digital tools to do diplomacy. This is using diplomacy to deal with the problems we've got in cyberspace, and we've got a lot. We've got cyber security problems. We've got cyber war problems. We've got cyber espionage problems. We've got cyber information warfare. We've got cyber crime. As companies, you're probably most worried about cyber crime. There's something else you should be worried about. How do we regulate cyberspace? How are we regulating the operation of companies? How do we deal with taxation issues? How do we deal with quality of service issues? A whole range of issues arising in cyberspace about regulating how it operates. And that impacts on companies. It impacts on companies' business plans. And these are issues that are going to be dealt with through multi-stakeholder diplomacy in the future. Companies negotiating with NGOs, negotiating with users groups, negotiating with governments. And so companies need to be developing the diplomatic skills to get engaged with this. But let's look at cyber security or cyber crime. Here's our typical hacker. Cyber crime depends on technical solutions. We're very obsessed with updating the local security systems onto our computer systems in companies. Yet it doesn't seem to be working. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Hackers are breaking through the security systems, not quite at will, but quite close to it. And we're not very good at working out when they do. There are studies suggesting that financial companies, on average, take 100 days to spot the penetration of their systems. 100 days, hackers inside their systems, on average. That means some are better and some are worse. Does anybody know, on average, how long it takes retail companies to identify they've been penetrated? Any offers? 200 days. This means we need to develop new approaches to cybersecurity. Cyber diplomacy offers us some, helping to identify and isolate potential hackers. Public diplomacy with clients, with the public. What happens when a company gets hacked, normally? Who gets the blame? The company. We have this image of the hacker as this single Robin Hood type figure. Slightly anarchic, slightly heroic. He's a criminal. We need proper public diplomacy campaigns engaging with the public to convince them that these guys are criminals. We need to improve the collaboration between governments and companies. Most companies, when they hear of another company being hacked, celebrate. Not me. Germans have a lovely word for it, Schadenfreude. That nice feeling when somebody else is suffering. I think what the Germans feel about the Brits and Brexit, to be honest, but that's the reaction of most companies. I didn't get hacked, he got hacked, poor him. We've got to get companies to understand and governments to understand that this is a joint operation. This is where, again, diplomacy is needed. Governments, for example, have got to be convinced that when they find flaws in operating systems, instead of keeping them so they can attack another government, they need to pass these to Microsoft or other software designers so they can develop the patches and put them up to guarantee the security. That again is going to require diplomacy involving companies and governments working together. And the final thought is developing better coordination within your companies. Oddly, it is never the cyber security expert who is responsible for the breach. It's the person whose password is password, or 1234, or the very clever people who have 4321. It's not just Americans who do this, by the way. When I joined the British Foreign Office in 1984 in the middle of the